setting up your webinar for, oh, look at that. So unfortunately, it looks like we won't be able to go to Twitter today, but hopefully the folks on Twitter will join us on Zoom. All right. So I think I'm done. I'm going to kick this off. Thank you, Andrew Webb, for joining us. My name is Chris Hinds. I'm the councilperson for Denver City Council's District 10, coming to you live from my bunker, or my really small second bedroom / closet. And we do a Facebook live stream we do a live stream every Friday at 1:30. Normally it is me talking, the talking head, talking to you and bobbling. And so I'm very fortunate and lucky to have a guest with me today, Andrew Webb, who is with Community Planning and Development with the City of Denver, a senior city planner. Is that right?
That's correct.
And also the CPD person who knows the most about group living, which is not controversial at all. So this will be a really short and boring conversation. No, actually, it will be a pretty interesting conversation, I think. So I think, Mr. Webb, you and I think you're going to give the way we've kind of spitballed it is you're going to give maybe a 10-minute overview on what group living is as it is now, yep. Because it has changed quite a bit. I want to also, I'll tease you a question that I'll ask in once you're done, but I'll tell you now. You've probably been asked this before, but what has changed? And I know that there are a bunch of people who have reached out and have talked about a statistic of 80-something% of people have opposed this proposal, and I think that a bunch of those respondents were actually based on a previous iteration. And so I want to get your thoughts on that. And then also, I saw that there was an email that went out this morning. I believe it was right before our good governance training. But I wasn't able to read all of it. But it sounds like that there was a new release from CPD about group living. So perhaps you can touch on that. But first,
sure.
And then after all that, the District 10 office conducted a survey on group living. Thank you to the 1,000 of you who reached out. The vast majority of you were District 10 residents, so thank you for that. I think about 14–15% of the people who responded were not District 10 residents, but I mean that's a pretty good sample size, I think. So I'll talk a bit about the survey that we conducted. I'll talk about whether it is a valid survey and based on is it representative of the district? Is it representative of the age groups? And then I will touch base on some of the survey results itself. We allowed people to enter in comments, which was really good because it turns out that a couple of our questions could have been more nuanced, and we didn't have that nuance, and the comments allowed that. But about 50% of the people who responded also provided comments, so that's making our analysis of the data a bit tougher. So anyway, I think that is all I want to share for now. Mr. Webb, take it away.
All right, well, great. Thank you, Councilman Hinds, for having me. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a slide deck here. Can you see that on screen?
I can. What we see on screen is the presenter view.
Okay.
As opposed to the, yeah, I think that's what you. Yeah, it's what presenter view and slideshow. I think that's or whichever. There we go. Yeah, that's.
Did that fix it? Great.
Yes. Thank you.
Now I have to figure out where my little advanced slide. Oh, there they are. Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Yes, again, I am Andrew Webb. I've been the project manager for the last 3 years on this effort to update the Denver zoning codes regulations for all residential uses. That includes everything from conventional households to residential care and other types of housing. And we are about a week and a few days out from a city council public hearing to consider these amendments. So this slide deck will go through, as short as I can make it, an overview of what is proposed and how that the proposals have evolved in recent months in response to some of the feedback we've heard. And I do apologize to the folks on the meeting or watching the live stream who have seen this presentation many times before, but I want to make sure that people who are just tuning in for the first time have a good understanding of what we're talking about here. So again, this is a set of amendments to the Denver zoning code. It does not impact the city's revised municipal code. Does not impact the building code, fire safety, and all those kind of requirements will not change as a part of this. And if these amendments are adopted to the Denver zoning code, I want to be clear that that does not mean that we are talking about the code that was adopted in 2010, and we still are working on some ways to address former Chapter 59 or the old code, which still covers about 20% of the city, but is not part of these code amendments. This is just to the Denver zoning code. We're proposing these amendments for various reasons. Among them are that our zoning code currently creates obstacles for establishing some of the residential care uses that we need, especially for some of our most vulnerable populations. Our regulations also simply keep people from living together in ways that are common around the country and around the world. And a lot of that can be traced back to the 1940s and 50s when our code language was first developed, when a lot of cities were developing zoning codes, and zoning codes often matched up with other efforts, commonly sort of summed up as redlining, that basically sought to exclude certain populations of people or people who are deemed undesirable. And so an example of that still remains here in Denver is that while most cities allow more unrelated people to live together as part of a household, Denver only allows more than 2 unrelated people to live together in multi-unit uses. So apartments and duplexes, units that on average are half the size of our detached housing stock, which makes up about 70% of the city's housing. We also are seeking to fix some known problems with the Denver zoning code. The language, again, has been brought forward over many generations and amended and added to, and that has resulted in a lot of repetitive or outdated language and a variety of permitting and notification requirements that cause a lot of confusion. So we're trying to kind of pull everything into one system here. This slide summarizes what would change. We're proposing to allow up to 5 adults of any relationship to live together as part of a household. We are also proposing a new congregate living use category that would include uses like rooming and boarding and rent by the room, single room occupancy, some uses that already exist in various places in the code. This is kind of pulling them together under one umbrella. And as is currently the case, these higher intensity residential uses, congregate living uses, would not be allowed in the lowest intensity zone districts like single and 2-unit and row house. And so those rent by the room and rooming and boarding type uses would remain allowed in higher intensity residential districts and mixed use and commercial districts, as is currently the case. And then for residential care, which is, I should note, is currently permitted in various ways citywide in both zoning codes, but we propose to update the Denver zoning code to consolidate what is currently a long list of residential care uses into a single use type called simply residential care. That would cover any residential use where people receive care as a requirement of residency. And we propose to treat all of those uses the same generally, or regulate them by size rather than by people served or their housing status, and with preserving the existing and in some cases enhancing the spacing and density requirements that limit concentration of larger facilities in any one place. We are proposing to allow a community or require a new upfront community meeting prior to application for a zoning permit for many types of residential care uses with mailed notification to neighbors. As a result of some of the dialogue that happened in recent months, we are proposing to prohibit those residential care uses that serve non-paroled individuals, sometimes referred to as halfway houses or by the technical state term community corrections, proposing to prohibit that particular type of residential care in the lowest intensity residential zone districts. Next few slides will talk about household regulations. This is what is allowed now in a household. So in a detached house, you can have up to 2 unrelated adults, and then there's no limit on the number of relatives to each who can live in a house, and any number of related people can live together. And in duplexes, apartments, condos, any housing where 2 or more houses are attached, you can have up to 4 unrelated adults, and with those unlimited relatives. This slide shows how some peer cities regulate this. The number of unrelated adults allowed per city is shown at the top of the blue columns. And we've also noted the average household size of these cities. And so I just would highlight here that a lot of cities allow many more unrelated people to live together as the functional equivalent of a family than Denver. We're fairly conservative there at 2. Compared to most Front Range cities, and we've actually added to this list recently. So we have about 45 cities on here now. And you can see that, for example, in Colorado, the majority of larger municipalities and populated unincorporated areas allow at least 5 unrelated adults to live together. But what we've learned from this data and from looking at census data on average household size is that even where in cities that allow more unrelated people to choose to live together in households, the average household size does not change in those cities. And I'll note that none of these cities on this table have made these changes recently. These are regulations that have been on the books in these places for a long time. And there has not been a major change in the way people actually choose to live together in these places, just additional flexibility in what the makeup of a house can look like. I'm going to skip that slide in the interest of time. So as many of you know, we have been working at this and in the legislative review phase since August of 2020 when we went to the planning board. At that time, we were proposing, in addition to allowing up to 5 adults in any household, whether or not they're related, we were proposing to allow more adults in larger houses. And that was actually, that had already been reduced from an earlier set of proposals that we rolled out in early 2020 at open houses a year ago now. At that time, we were proposing to allow 8 in any house, plus more in larger houses. Between September and December, we met with the City Council's Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure, or LUTI committee 7 times to really dig into the details of these amendments. And one of the things that we heard is that there was just not support at this time for allowing more people than 5 in those larger house structures. So in response to that feedback we heard and the lack of support that we saw for that, we did revise the proposal again to remove the provision that would have allowed more adults in a larger house and the provision that would have allowed unlimited relatives to live with unrelated people in a house. So that leaves us with what you see on this slide here. Essentially, it's kind of an either or. If it's a household where all adults are related, as is currently the case, there would be no limit on the number of adults who could live in the household. But if the household is made up of people who are not related, whether that's, the whole house is unrelated, is all unrelated adults, or a mix of 2 unrelated families living together, there would be a full stop cap of 5 on the number of adults, regardless of relationship, who could live in that house. Let's see, I'm going to skip this slide because I already talked about what we're doing with residential care in terms of consolidating the residential care uses, but I do want to highlight some key changes that were made during the LUDI process. I already mentioned the change to community corrections that we are in response to feedback that we heard from council members during that process who were I think in turn, being responsive to their constituents. We did revise the proposal to prohibit residential care that serves non-paroled individuals in single unit, 2-unit, and the row house 2.5 zone districts, the 3 lowest intensity residential zone districts in the city. And then for the type 1 facilities, which is the smallest type of residential care facility allowed in the city and would be allowed in any zone district. And I should note that residential care uses, including shelters and many other types, are currently also allowed in residential zone districts. But for those smallest facilities that are allowed to be in a house type structure, we are proposing a new requirement that would actually limit the density of facilities in neighborhoods. So we've heard that cities are required by the Fair Housing Act and by the state group home statute to accommodate groups of people receiving care in smaller numbers as a household for the purpose of zoning. And so we already do permit, and there are probably 60 or so residential care uses in houses in Denver. So this would be a new requirement that would limit the number of those smallest types of facilities in any one neighborhood. And then for the type 2 facilities, that second tier, some changes that were made during the LUDI process were reducing that maximum size of those facilities in single, 2-unit, and row house zone districts for a year-round facility to 20 guests, and only allowing those types of facilities on parcels that were either previously in use for a residential care use or for some civic, public, or institutional use, such as a church that's no longer being used. Just to highlight specifically community corrections, because I know that's been an issue that has been of particular interest to many stakeholders. This slide shows where community corrections are currently permitted. The existing facilities are shown with the black squares, and then the pink and gray buffers around them show their current spacing and density requirements. So when all limitations on community corrections are taken into consideration, what's left in tan there are the areas where new facilities could be established, kind of in that essentially inverted L of the city's most underserved and most vulnerable neighborhoods. There is currently about 3,000 acres or about 1,200 parcels where an applicant could conceivably get a zoning permit for a community corrections facility now. These proposed changes would allow somebody to apply for a zoning permit in the areas shown in tan on this map. So essentially it's any zone district that allows residential uses, but not the single unit, 2-unit, and row house 2.5 zone districts. Areas shown in blue on this map are former Chapter 59, so any residential care regulations will be per that old zoning code, not the Denver zoning code. So if these changes are adopted as proposed, we would be expanding to about 1,500 parcels roughly citywide on corridors and in mixed use areas where somebody could apply for a zoning permit for community corrections, a residential care serving non-paroled individuals, where they would have access to daily needs like transit and employment as they begin that transition ultimately back into community from a period of incarceration. The final slide here, this just shows the next steps. We'll have, as I mentioned up front, the City Council public hearing for these amendments is scheduled for February 8th. That's a week from this coming Monday. Immediately after that hearing, depending on whether these amendments are adopted, we are proposing to make as a separate project that would have its own public outreach and review and legislative review process, an amendment to the Denver Revised Municipal Code that would make the Denver zoning code's household regulations applicable citywide, including in areas of former Chapter 59. So that would begin soon after the City Council public hearing for these Denver zoning code amendments. And then we have also committed to at least 4 years of post-adoption monitoring of the outcomes of these amendments to the Denver zoning code, where we'll be tracking things like housing tenure, the distribution of new zoning permits for residential care uses, that sort of thing, to ensure that the goals that we had at the beginning of the project are being advanced, and that we've not seen any unintended consequences, at which time we'll be reporting back to both the planning board and the city council, who could propose amendments down the road if there are issues. So just note that all of a lot of materials, including the actual draft amendments themselves, shown with in a strike through language style, can be found on the project website, which has a full archive of every presentation we've ever given, every draft document we've ever put out. And that website is shown there. You can also sign up for office hours with me on Thursday afternoons, alternating afternoons and evenings, if you have questions that you really want to dig into the details of. And you can also see how to participate and provide testimony, or simply just watch the February 8th City Council hearing. And then finally, I'll just note that we at CPD is charged with collecting the public input that comes in for any amendment to the zoning code, or a map amendment like a rezoning, and so we are building that record that will be included with the project staff report that goes to the council late next week. And so if you would like to provide written comment, I know many people email their city council member directly, and that's great, but if you CC me, we'll make sure it also is included in that record of public comment that's provided to the council. So that's it. I think I may have gone a little over 10 minutes, but hopefully not by too much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So as I prefaced, the first question that I want to ask is about the survey results, and there's a whole bunch of constituent outreach in August, and there are people talking about the percentage of people who are opposed relative to that constituent outreach. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that percentage? And
Sure.
And also, well, actually, I'm going to ask you a question about a slide here in a second. So I was going to say take down the presentation, but leave it up for a second, because I'll ask you about a slide.
Okay. So with regard to the feedback we have gotten, you are correct that a lot of that feedback, especially the feedback that came in for the LUDI committee, the Land Use Infrastructure or Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, was in opposition to those proposals. And I do want to note that in several stages of public input during this project, we have made fairly major changes to the proposals in response. We've tried to hear that feedback and make proposals balancing those changes against our need and our adopted city plans and policies for providing more access to affordable housing options and flexibility for housing. I don't want to presuppose that that people feel differently about the amendments as revised, but a lot of the feedback that is reflected was specific to, for example, community corrections directly in neighborhoods, and that is not something that is proposed anymore. As well as concerns about very large households of people, and the earlier proposal that would have allowed unlimited family members to each of 5 unrelated adults permitted in a house. And so we've heard that and have sought to be responsive to that. And the change, like the full cap of 5 people in houses where not everybody is related, is a direct response to that. So certainly we don't try to encourage a sort of a horse race of people sending in input on one side or the other, and we just record that comments that come in, and and provide them to the city council and ask them to or the planning board or whoever is reviewing at any given time. We ask them to come to their own conclusions. But I would just note that a lot of the feedback, a lot of the changes that have been made have been made after a lot of the feedback that has previously come in. So we have tried to be responsive to the input we've received.
Well, and we've also gotten a fair amount of feedback about the Chapter 59 bridge amendment. We in District 10 don't really have much Chapter 59, which means that most of District 10 is fair game. And we in District 10 have a lot of multifamily zoning, which means most of District 10 is fair game. And so the smallest zoning types we don't really have in our district. And so certainly that the 20% of the city was automatically excluded because of this former Chapter 59 was something that we heard. And so I'm glad that you touched on Chapter 59. I would say I've already received the briefing for the Chapter 59 bridge amendment. So I'm glad that that's moving forward quickly, because it's not okay that that all of District 10 is fair game, and some other council districts, a large portion of those districts are totally off limits just because we haven't been fast enough bringing them up to the code that we use today. One of the reason why I asked you to keep the presentation up is, could you go back to the graphic that shows where residential care facilities could be in the city of Denver? Not the way it is today, but if this were adopted as written. Yep, that one. So.
And I do want to highlight that, just to be clear, this one shows where community corrections specifically, so residential care that serves non-paroled individuals, residential care, any other type of residential care is allowed in any zone district except what you see in green on this map.
So as a teaser to the survey results, community corrections does elicit a strong response, even from the people who might otherwise be in favor of group living. So this amendment. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is I see some spots that are in District 10 that are in the tan color. I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks as if the way I see something down in District 2 where there are two facilities are right next to each other. Is that right? I guess the way this graphic looks, it's almost like there's meant to be an exclusion zone, and it seems like there in another slide you talk about there being an exclusion zone, as in they cannot be within 1,000 feet of one another or whatever the zone is. So I'm curious, is there an exclusion zone, and
yes,
how might that affect the tan areas?
Yeah, so these are the existing facilities, and you're correct. This is Fort Logan down here, and there are a couple located right next to each other there. So what's shown the existing facilities are shown with the black dots in the center, and then the red is the 1,200-foot spacing requirement that would be required for any residential care, and not just community corrections, but any residential care facility seeking to locate would have to be 1,200, serving 41 or more people would have to be at least 1,200 feet or 3 Denver city blocks on average from another residential care facility of the same size. So that's what's shown in the pink, and then the gray is the density buffer zone, and so within that zone, essentially what that means is that's a 1 mile radius essentially in all directions around a facility, and a subject site cannot have more than 3 other facilities within that 1 mile radius. Or it can't receive a permit. And so the idea there, and that's similar to how the requirement would work for the type 1 for the smallest facilities in lower intensity neighborhoods, is that if a site is proposed, for a zoning permit, and the city is reviewing that site, it'll do an analysis to make sure that within a 1 mile radius so essentially, it's 2 miles across, there's not more than 3 other nearby facilities. And the goal of that is to cumulatively prevent the consolidate or the concentration of facilities in any one place.
And when you say facilities, that any residential care facilities, not specifically community correction facilities.
That's correct.
Okay, so okay, yeah, and if people have questions, I know that this is a kind of a funkier format than normal, and so we do have on Zoom, we have a question section. So there's a Q&A button, and you can ask questions through the Q&A. I would normally field questions directly from Facebook and Twitter. It is harder for me to get to that because we've got this special format for today. Hopefully we are live streaming to them. So at any rate, let's see. Did I have another question that I wanted to ask you that I told you I was going to ask before we started the question or the presentation? The email that came out today, there was an additional flyer. I don't know if you have that and want to put that up on screen. If you don't, that's not a big deal. But otherwise, it appears that there's some additional communication that went out this morning, and I haven't digested it fully. And why not share it with everyone as I learn about it?
So I don't have the, if you're talking about if you're talking about the Safe and Sound flyer that went out today, or are you talking about the flyer that we put out today?
There was a CPD flyer that went out this morning at
Got it.
8:55.
Yeah.
Good governance meeting started very shortly after that. Let's see if I can.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So we did put out a response, a document that
actually I just got it, or I just pulled it up. So let's see if I can share my screen.
Great. And essentially the goal of that is to just provide responses to some of the statements that have been put out there.
Okay, so this is this is the document that I received this morning, and again, I haven't fully read it. So I just if you want to, I don't want you to read from it because everyone else could read from it, but perhaps you could just synthesize.
Sure.
I think the email said that you participated in the creation of this document, right?
Yes, our department put this together to try to provide some simple responses to some of the claims that have gone out there, and the first thing I would say just in general is that these are changes to the zoning code. They do not automatically mean that any action will be taken by somebody applying for a zoning permit. There's not like a determination that a new facility of some sort will go here, or that suddenly all households will become much larger. And so this first one sought to address the concerns from that have been issued that this is a huge increase in density, and we just wanted to highlight that that even cities the majority of cities allow more unrelated adults to live together, do not try to only limit single detached houses to only nuclear families, but that even in those cities, household sizes generally tend to stay the same. People statistically choose to live together the same way, and we have no expectation that there's suddenly going to be an explosion of 5-person households. We know that there are some that already exist that have been under the radar, and we want to make it legal for people to do that, to choose to live together, but with safeguards against commercialization and kind of rent by the room scenarios.
Cool. And I don't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to buy some time so that people could ask, could put in their questions, and now we have some. And so certainly, what I will do is I'll make this document available.
Great, yeah, that's
who will read
we
it
have.
or who wants to read it. I don't know if I don't want to waste your time or everyone else's time because they can read this whenever they want. So, so I'm going to stop the share and move over the questions. So, if I may, hot seat, but you are the subject matter expert, so hopefully these are easier for you to answer. So the first question I have is, I'm still confused about how many unrelated people would be allowed to live in a 1,200 square foot condo unit located in a complex of 48 units. And then
I can respond to that.
I don't know if that. So okay, so you.
So currently, and the code regulates by dwelling unit, not by, so the number in a complex doesn't play a role. Currently, an unlimited number of related adults could live together in that condo, and up to 2 unrelated adults could live together in that up to 4 unrelated adults could live together in that condo, because in multi-unit uses, you can have up to 4 unrelated adults currently.
Under current law.
Under current law, that's right.
And code, because this is a code change, not a law change.
And this is a zoning code change. That's right. And there is not the Denver building code and housing code do not have a minimum, space per person requirement. Rooms that people sleep in have to be at least 70 square feet, and have to have egress and entry points. So you have to have if it's a basement room, for example, you have to actually have a legal egress window, which typically has a little set of steps up to it, and it's not not just a little tiny window up at the top. But there's not currently a limit on the number of people who can live in a house if they're all related. And in multi-unit housing, more unrelated people can currently live together. So what would change would be all dwelling units would be regulated the same. And so in this hypothetical condo, up to 5 unrelated adults could live together, or
a combination of related, unrelated.
Pardon me.
A combination of related.
That's correct. Yep.
Adults.
Yep.
So
Essentially,
it's unrelated. Then suddenly the cap becomes 5.
Exactly.
If everyone's related, you can have 1 million.
As is currently the case. That's
8
right.
million. Well, except for the 70 square foot. So whatever, it's 1,200 divided by 70. That's the number of maximum number of related adults. But if any of them are unrelated, the number goes to 5.
That's right.
Okay.
And I would note, the building code, for example, the fire safety code requires that you have sprinklers if you have more than 10 people in a house. So, and I'm not aware of any houses that are built with sprinklers, and so that would be a fairly expansive addition. So while we know there are a handful of very large family homes out there, the vast majority of households in Denver are 5 or under people.
Great, thank you. Next question, why did the allowed zoning for community corrections exclude SUTU and RH 2.5? Isn't that inequitable? Cherry Creek, for example, has a lot of PUD, but it would likely, there's some RH3, and there would be likely, if there were PUD moving to the new zoning code, it might go to RH.
Yeah. So this is an example of kind of the practical challenges we face anytime we're amending laws and making changes to the code. It is our position that all residential care uses should be allowed in all zone districts. And so the CPD's original proposal would have allowed non-paroled individuals to be served in residential care in any zone district. But during the LUDI process from September to December of last year, it was clear that we didn't have support to get that through. And so, we also are trying to, we want to make changes to the code, but we also have to be realistic about what's adoptable. And ultimately, we, in response to the feedback we were hearing, recommended moving away from allowing that particular type of use in the lowest intensity residential zone districts, but allowing them in the RH3 on up, those being districts that in some cases allow higher building forms like the apartment form, are typically established in higher density and higher intensity areas of the city, maybe surrounded by mixed use zoning, that sort of thing. So that is why that's why we made that decision and why we chose that as the kind of the threshold. But I just would note that we think that the ultimately the most equitable approach would be to allow to treat all residential care uses the same, not exclude any population. But we did have to make some practical choices to get to a point that we felt like this was something that the city council could adopt.
I too don't like that. I'm a little frustrated that areas of the city that are primarily single family somehow get a free pass. That doesn't seem equitable to District 10. So thank you for that. Why not change Chapter 59 before you make a decision on group living?
Well, the Chapter 59 code itself can't be amended by city law. So the closest we can come is the municipal code does bridge some standards from the Denver zoning code into the areas under former Chapter 59. Basically says, for the purposes of determining a setback or protected district standards, refer to the Denver zoning code standard versus former Chapter 59. And that's what we're proposing to do with the bridge amendment for the household definition later this year. But so to change former Chapter 59 will take a bigger effort that we do agree needs to be done to examine all of those custom PUDs that were created in former Chapter 59 from the 60s through the 90s, and find for each individual property an analogous zone district in the Denver zoning code, or potentially write new PUDs based on the Denver zoning code for those areas. And that's a huge undertaking that we agree needs to be done. It has always been the intent to have one city, one code, and we're actually going to spend some of this year scoping out what that would actually take, what resources we would need to actually do that bigger rezoning project at some point. But in the meantime, we have continued the Denver zoning code has stayed up to date, and we continue to keep it up to date and modernized. And we believe that it is important to keep updating the code that covers the majority of the city.
So just as a time check, I know that we're losing you in about 15 minutes, and I did promise to give survey results. And we have a few questions outstanding still. Would you be interested in seeing the survey results, Mr. Webb, or do you want? I have to go 3, so I can spend 30 minutes going through the survey results without you, if and we could keep going through questions. Actually, how about let's do that, so that, and then I can catch you up on the survey.
That would be great. Yeah, I would love to stay late, but I do have to pick up my daughter from school at 2:30 today. So
I can't imagine why you'd want to be a human too, and a father. But anyway, that's okay. So on the emergency expansion provision, how many days might that apply given Denver temperature ranges?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I want to highlight some distinctions here. The code does currently allow for the operation of seasonal shelters. Those are shelters that only operate for about 1/3 of the year. Those are currently allowed in any zone district, and we're retaining those provisions in these amendments. Those those types of uses are often only opened at a certain time of the year to cover periods of cold temperature. However, the code also currently allows for emergency suspension of use limitations, but without a lot of clear criteria. So these amendments do set forth some new criteria for that, and for suspension of use limitations in a major emergency, where a city agency would request of the city zoning administrator to suspend use limitations for a period of time. And as is currently the case, those would be flexible based on the situation or the need. Separately, we're also proposing a new short-term emergency expansion allowance that would permit an expansion effectively of 25% over the number of people permitted on a zoning permit for a site for up to 10 overnight stays in the event of some localized emergency, let's say a fire at an assisted living facility. Another assisted living facility would be able to take on a few more people to help provide housing, and there are criteria also set forth for that. It's not an exclusive list. That emergency expansion is only allowed for up to 10 days, and it's kind of up to the providers to determine when they actually need to do that, but they do need to report those to the city and are not allowed to do that repeatedly in a given year. But yes, so we are proposing a new kind of smaller scale expansion allowance. So it's essentially 125% of what you're allowed to, the number of guests you're allowed to have on your zoning permit. So if it is, 50 people on your zoning permit, you could have maybe 10 more people for that period of 10 days, but that's the extent of it.
Okay. What about the requirements for, so Mr. Tanner lives in Cherry Creek. The question is, what requirements are there for community input and what can be done to resolve community claims? Kind of a broad question about community input in general, so I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Do you want to take a stab at it, or I can
Sure, I can. So to start with, the city does not currently, and no city really can deny zoning permits based solely on opposition to a proposed project. Cities are required by the Fair Housing Act and by other state and federal regulations to accommodate people. And so typically, if a zoning permit application is made and the proposal meets the criteria in the zoning code, the city will grant the permit. This is currently the case and would be the case moving forward. We are establishing that new upfront public meeting requirement for residential care uses serving 11 or more people, which gives the opportunity for neighbors to receive mailed notification, and that includes business owners, renters, and others nearby, of the proposal, and come to a meeting, get to know the operator, and potentially enter into private agreements like a good neighbor agreement or something like that with those operators. And as is currently the case, neighbors can provide input to the city. Our community information meeting requirement does require that a neutral facilitator provide notes of the meeting to the zoning administrator as part of the record for consideration for that zoning permit. And any city decision on zoning can be appealed, and that's currently the case and would remain the case. So you can appeal, so neighbors can appeal to the zoning Board of Adjustments. And then if there are issues, again, as is currently the case, the 311 system is a starting point, and our neighborhood inspection services team goes out and opens a case for every call or note that comes in on the Pocket Gov app for any type of violation of zoning requirements or any other city code requirements like noise or trash accumulation, that sort of thing.
And for what it's worth, we're answering the questions first in, first out. So I'm not cherry picking, just whichever ones we receive first. What oversight will there be if the administrator decrees a facility could be built in a neighborhood? Is this person elected or appointed?
The zoning administrator is, I guess, appointed. They are they're a director within community planning and development.
Appointed by the mayor, or?
You're asking a question that I don't really know the answer to. I think at the end of the day, the mayor appoints the directors of all city departments. So yes, by extension, I think that is true.
Okay.
And The zoning code doesn't regulate operations of facilities. It doesn't currently, and it wouldn't moving forward. But the city's code of ordinances has regulations for the operations of a lot of types of facilities. Most facilities operated by companies have to actually have a business license. And then the higher intensity uses, community corrections, for example, have also state standards and statutes, and the Denver Community Corrections Board that oversees them, and Department of Safety, that sort of thing. So in other words, oversight varies based on the type of the operator and the people served.
Who's going to monitor and enforce the 5 unrelated adults? How about this? So I think the idea is, as it is currently, we currently enforce on a complaint basis. And then, so if you perceive that your neighbor has more than a certain number of unrelated adults, you go to 311, and 311 then hands that information off to an inspector that would then perform an inspection. And if necessary, it is okay for the city of Denver to do DNA tests. That's rare, but you know, like to do biological, to make, I mean, if people claim that they're unrelated and there's reason to believe that they're not, I mean, they claim that they're related and there's reason to believe they're not, can the city of Denver ask for biological tests?
I don't think that's ever gotten to that point before. It always starts with a door knock and
often, wave and hello.
Yeah, and often people will immediately. Yeah, often people will say, you know, they'll be asked, and they'll say, no, we're not related. It's not something that it's not a regulation that I think a lot of people are aware of. And so it often comes as a surprise to people that they're not allowed to live with roommates currently. But the city can ask for proof of relationships. And so that could be documentation, things like birth certificates, stuff like that. They can and do ask to review documents proving those relationships.
Got it. So it looks like this one is more a comment than a question. So who does a residential landlord to negotiate a lease with each individual? Oh, does a landlord negotiate the lease with an individual, or each individual, or an authorized person? Will each occupant sign on the lease? And I think this is landlord-tenant law, where everyone who lives in a place must be on the lease.
The zoning code does not regulate financial arrangements, but I would say that, you know, we do have criteria and a definition that highlight that when we're talking about a household, we are talking about a people who jointly occupy the household, who share day-to-day activities. And this is language that comes from other city codes as well. This is fairly a common approach. This is new to the Denver zoning code, a new definition of nonprofit household that clarifies that the occupants of the home shall jointly occupy the household and not be managed and kind of coming and going based on decisions by some third party or landlord or manager. So hypothetically, that would mean a group of people who are all on one lease, who are sharing a mortgage, and those types of documents. We don't have requirements about that, but those are the types of documents that we might request when doing an enforcement action on a house like that.
But at the end of the day, the lease itself is between the landlord and the tenants.
That's correct.
This particular conversation,
that's right.
That might be applicable documentation, but we don't care if the lease is valid or invalid, or if the people are should be on the lease and they're not. At the end of the day, if there are a group of people living in the same domicile and there are more than 5 unrelated, assuming this were to move on forward, doesn't matter what the lease says. It matters how many people are actually there.
Right.
Okay. Let's see. So we only have a few minutes left. I got one more question for you. District 10 is full of blocks with mostly SU housing, but there might be one or more apartment buildings on the block as well. What happens there?
I'm sorry, can you ask that one again?
Yes, sir. Happy to. So District 10 is full of blocks with mostly SU housing, but there might be one or more apartment buildings on the block as well. What happens there?
So this wouldn't be any different by apartment or by house. These regulations would treat all dwelling units the same. So an apartment is is considered essentially attached dwelling units, and a single detached house is a single dwelling unit. But the regulations would be the same for any dwelling unit, regardless of where it is located.
Okay. And it looks like we still have a few questions. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to leave them unanswered. Kudos to you for sending your child to school. I know that is a big conversation. I don't know anything about Denver public schools. I don't have any kids. I know that also is a hot topic, so I'm not going to touch that hot topic because I don't want to get burned. But I recognize that you have to go. So thank you for that. And just because you're leaving doesn't mean that the broadcast is over. So thank you, Mr. Webb, for all you do. And thanks for answering questions and giving the presentation. I'm going to move along and talk about the survey that we provided. So, and I put the project website in the chat there. If anybody missed it, we do have office hours on Thursdays. So if you had more that you wanted to talk about, we encourage folks to join us. Thank you. And sure. If you don't see the chat because you're on social media, the website is denvergov.org/group-living. All one word put together. That's right. Thank you all very much. All right, thanks. No, wait till, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to, well, I guess I'll leave the Q&A up. So the next phase of this presentation, I believe, and so again, I have to go with 3, but I think 30 minutes will be enough to give a teaser of our survey. So District 10 conducted a survey, and the survey, we ended up getting about 1,000 responses. So that's a pretty decent response level. Just because we got a bunch of responses doesn't mean that it is necessarily a survey that makes a whole lot of sense. It could be skewed entirely. And so I tried to do a little bit of analysis on, we got 1,000 responses. I represent District 10, District 10, there it is, not the whole city. And so we did ask in the survey if people live in District 10, and specifically in which neighborhood in District 10 do they live. And so we were really lucky, I think, in the survey responses in that 86% of the people who responded reported that they live in District 10. So so thank you for the 14% or so who did not live in District 10 and chose to complete our survey. Anyway, I will comment on them briefly, but for the most part, we set them aside. Not to be insulting, but they have representation elsewhere, and I hope that they receive that representation. So so the thing that I want to, let's see, I'm going to share my screen again. I hope. There we go. So I now want to talk about, so of those 1,000 are, about 860 responses or so that were District 10 residents. Where were they? Because, we asked people what neighborhood they lived in, and we want to see if, being an elected official is tough, man. It's, my role is to listen to my constituents. It is to synthesize the information that we get from constituents, and this is a tough a very difficult district because one neighborhood may or may not represent the same needs or concerns as another neighborhood. And in District 10, that is definitely the case. There are other areas of the city where the constituency is more homogeneous, but we'll see here in some of the data, we'll see that there's definitely a difference in in areas of District 10. So the first question that I wanted to ask myself is, did the District 10 survey get a representative sample of each neighborhood in District 10? Certainly we want to make sure that everyone is heard, that each neighborhood is heard, and in case you don't already know, District 10 has more than 70,000 constituents. So it is we got a lot of people in our district, and what I did is we did with the survey process, we used SurveyMonkey, and so I took the respondents in SurveyMonkey, and again I took out the people who self-reported they weren't in District 10. So of all the people who reported they were in neighborhoods of District 10, and these are the statistical neighborhoods. And by the way, statistical neighborhoods, I know the reason why we chose statistical neighborhoods is because they are distinct, they are unique, no overlap. RNOs overlap each other sometimes, and houses overlap RNOs. So for example, my home has 10 RNOs that, so I have nearly a dozen. If I were a baker, I could put all of these donuts into a thing. So anyway, so statistical neighborhood is a way to make sure that the geographic areas are distinct. So these are the statistical neighborhoods. These are the percentage responses from each of those neighborhoods. I compared that with our open data. I got it from denvergov.org/open data. And the most recent information that's on the website now is 2018 data. And this is the breakdown of the population of District 10 residents in each neighborhood. So as one might realize, Capitol Hill is our densest neighborhood in the city, and it also has about a quarter of all of the constituents in District 10. So what I did is I took the survey responses and compared it to the statistical, the 2018 open data to see if a neighborhood was representative. And of the different neighborhoods, Belcaro, Capitol Hill, North Capitol Hill, and Spear were underrepresented in the survey results. So Cap Hill was the most underrepresented. It is also, again, a quarter of the constituents. The neighborhoods of Cheeseman Park, Cherry Creek, Congress Park, and Country Club were overrepresented. Cherry Creek just barely, but overrepresented in the survey results. And then Golden Triangle was accurately represented. It was just under 0.5% underrepresented. So I don't know really. I'm not a smart enough statistician or survey person to know what to do with that data, but at least we know, and we can move accordingly. So another interesting metric is the age of the survey respondent. And so what we did is we asked each survey respondent to identify buckets of people who live in their household. And so these can be selected multiple times because it might be a parents and children or whatnot. So that's why some of these were reported, people under 18. Wasn't necessarily that they completed surveys. It was that that the people who completed surveys had someone in their household who was under 18. So you could pick multiple boxes. And I highlighted in yellow, the median age of the district, by the way, is 36.8. Again, same 2018 data. And then the median age of the resident of each of those neighborhoods is here. And then I highlighted that in the bucket. Interesting data point. In almost every neighborhood, 65 plus was the most uh, identified age bracket in our survey. So that is not in that's a bit older than the average district resident. But again, I don't know what to do with that necessarily. I'm just identifying it as it appears that the typical person who completed the survey was older than the typical person who lives in District 10. So the next question that I want to cover is an actual survey question, and that was the number of unrelated people. So the question was, the proposal would cap the number of adults permitted to live together in households where not all residents are related at 5. Currently, only 2 are allowed in a house and 4 in a duplex or apartment. So we asked people to give us a one bullet answer out of 5, and the 5 different answers were strongly approve, approve, neutral, disapprove, or strongly disapprove. And so I took that that survey response and compared it by neighborhood. And so, for example, in the Volcaro neighborhood, as I showed in the previous slide, the previous Excel sheet, there wasn't a whole lot of response from the Volcaro neighborhood as an example. But so in that neighborhood, the average result of the people who responded was a 2.13. So basically, that neighborhood tended to disapprove with this question. Interestingly, I said I would do a nod to the folks who submitted the survey who didn't live in District 10. Those who submitted the survey who didn't live in District 10 tended to be more on the approve side of the equation. Thank you for playing. I'm glad that we have that data point. I'm not going to use that as far as how I allow the survey results to affect my vote. But I just wanted to throw it out there because a bunch of people did provide results or responses who didn't live in District 10. So as you look through the data, it is interesting that the more north you go in District 10 or the more west you go in District 10, the more approving of this question you get. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting idea and just an interesting data point. What we found, what we found is that I think I mentioned this early in the live stream. What we found is that we got a bunch of responses and then we had a bunch of comments to the responses. And I am going to see where. All right. I did a bunch of screenshots of the responses to the survey, and of course, they are in random order, which doesn't help me at all. There we go. Okay. So I am going to reshare my screen. Share screen again. And I am going to go to. So of all the responses we received, we found that about 30% of the responses strongly approved to this first question. Actually, I think this was question 2. Question 1 was your email address, and that was just to make sure that we were getting unique responses. Another 21% approved, another 31% strongly disapproved. So about 51% of those we surveyed, it's about half, just said they either approve or strongly approve of the cap of 5 for if there is anyone who's unrelated in the home. What we found, however, is in the comments, strongly disapprove doesn't necessarily mean that, well, so in the comments, we found that there was a portion of the people who strongly disapproved because they wanted the cap to be 8 or 10 or unlimited, and they were angry that that the current proposal doesn't go far enough. Of course, there were also quite a few people who strongly disapproved because they felt that the current proposal still goes too far. So we thought that we had a bit of an analysis on that 31% of strong disapproval. It turns out that it is more difficult than we thought, and so I was hoping to do a bit more analysis before we come up with the final answer, but certainly what I would say is about half the folks who responded said that they approve or strongly approve of the current number of adults permitted when not everyone is related. So I will continue to do additional work on the comments are in the strongly disapprove and get smarter about how many disapprove because it doesn't go far enough and how many disapprove because it goes too far. Let's see what else I wanted to. Crud. So I've got a bunch of these different slides, and unfortunately, they are not in an order that I would like for them to be. So, so I'm going to try my best to, in the 15 minutes we have left, to go through the survey results. Allowing any number of related adults, the information seems to be a little more in favor of, hey, if you have a big family and you're all family, then you can continue to, and you're all biological family, then you can continue to live together regardless of size. So that seems to be a bit more of a consensus. This was an interesting response, I believe. It said, if it were legal, would you like to allow more unrelated people to live with you? And about half the folks said it was very unlikely. And Mr. Webb had a slide of about 48 different municipalities around the nation and different municipal regulation that says anywhere from 2 to 10 unrelated adults can live together. And so while the law is broad, it appears to, in actuality, be somewhere between 2 and 3, despite what the law shows. And maybe this survey data point seems to support that would be the case here in the city of Denver, in that, sure, if we allow 5 people, if anyone's unrelated, they're not going to really change their size. So have you ever lived with more than one other unrelated adult? A lot of people said yes. So we did hear in, so this is, quantitative data. There's also qualitative data, as in interviewing folks and understanding what, hearing what they have to say helps us understand a bit more of the quantitative data. And in one RNO meeting, we had someone say, well, yeah, sure, I lived with a whole bunch of people in college, but that's not where I am today. So, so the person was not interested in allowing more unrelated adults to live together because because of where they are now, as opposed to where they were at some point in their life. So I'm not making any value judgment on that necessarily, but perhaps that explains why 3/4 of respondents said that they had lived with one other unrelated adult. Maybe it was they did earlier in their life, and now where they are today, they don't want more unrelated adults. Do you know someone who is now living with more than one other unrelated adult? Basically, do you know someone who's breaking the law? And I know that some, we got some response that people were concerned about potentially privacy, or they're, revealing some private information. That's not what surveys are about. Surveys are about aggregating information and collecting and reporting on a bunch of data. A body of data points, not on individual data points. And so while 2/3 of folks approximately appear to say that they know people living illegally, I'm not going to turn any of them in. And really the idea is to collect information so that we get smarter about who I'm serving, and we get smarter about who's submitting the survey information. So as I mentioned, this is the full data point about statistical neighborhoods, including the 17% of folks who took the survey and self-reported that they don't live in District 10. So, and I don't know how 64 people skipped that. I think that was a recorded question. So, way to go, you hackers. Let's see, we got another 11 minutes. Survey results. A lot of the people surveyed live in single-family homes. The majority of folks who completed surveys, that is wildly different than the district itself. The vast majority of people who live in District 10 live in multifamily units. So that just again shows that the people who completed the survey are the body of folks who completed the survey are not the exactly representative of the body of folks who live in District 10. Let's see next. The age range of people living in your home. I showed an Excel analysis of this by neighborhood, but in general, 33% of the folks who responded, at least one person in their household was over 65, and the median age is 36. So 36.7, is that what the number is? But so basically, there are the survey results skew older than the age of the people who live in the district. How many adults live in your home? Currently, vast majority of folks who responded to our survey are following. It's one or two, and it doesn't talk about related or unrelated, but it looks like a lot of people who completed the survey, nearly 2/3, are them and their partner, or perhaps parent and child. I was going to say son, but that I think they're probably more than just sons who are children. Okay, that is not related to this at all. Today is a campaign finance reporting deadline, and not related to this presentation. So I think those are all the slides that I have, which is unfortunate because I wanted to also share the community corrections slide, because it was 2/3 of the people that we surveyed responded that they were not interested in community corrections. So I will share that. I didn't have that information before today. So And apparently I don't even have it right now, but I want to say that the survey results were something like, actually, I wonder if I can look that up without wasting all your time. Of course, this is the best live stream ever, right? To watch someone surf the net. Woo, I love it. I'm gonna take off the share screen. And hopefully I can do this again without, I've already logged into SurveyMonkey. And I clicked on the wrong survey. I apologize I should have had this pulled up already. But I think that this is then this is really the last data point I want to share. So if you're irritated that I'm wasting your time, I don't, this will be the last slide. So you won't lose anything other than this one data point. There will be, we did definitely ask additional questions like, have you ever lived with more than one other unrelated adult? 3/4 of folks said yes. Do you know someone who's now living with one? Yeah, I already covered that. Oh, community corrections. So the question is, some constituents have recommended allowing more flexibility for people living in community corrections facilities. Here's Porthos. For better access to transit jobs and services, which can help keep them from becoming homeless when leaving their program. Do you know someone who could benefit from these facilities being closer to transit jobs and services? So the question is, do you know someone who could benefit from these services? And 3/4 of the respondents said no. So that was a little different than the question I thought was asked. But at any rate, that is all I have for you now. I know that isn't a full, complete analysis. We wanted to provide more, and but we'll definitely have more analysis before February 8th, and certainly I intend to be working on that as soon as possible. So thank you all. I know normally we try to keep these live streams to half an hour. I knew this also was going to be a hot topic, not hot pocket, that's something else. So thank you for all of you who have continued to tune in, and I will let you know as we get more of the survey results. Have a wonderful Friday.